Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Ready to explore another fascinating corner of the AI world?
Always. What are we diving into today?
Today, it's all about open data sets for training large language models, or LLMs.
Oh yeah, open data sets. Those are super important.
Absolutely, and we've got a fantastic paper to guide us towards best practices for open data sets for LLM training. It's a collaborative effort, and a lot of the big names in open source AI are involved, folks like Mozilla and Eleuther AI.
Nice.
So, LLMs, those powerful AI systems that can write poems, generate code, you name it, they learn from these massive data sets.
Right, huge amounts of data.
But here's the thing. A lot of AI companies are really secretive about the data they're using for training. It's like a hidden recipe.
Yeah, and that lack of transparency, that's a bit worrying, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Because if we don't know what's going into these systems, it makes it hard to see like potential biases or even predict how they might be misused.
It's a black box in a
That's
way.
exact.
And it's not just theoretical either. We're seeing the real-world consequences of this closed data approach.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Creative communities are pushing back. Artists and writers are concerned about how their work is being used to train these AIs without their consent.
It's a big issue, and it's leading to some pretty high-profile copyright lawsuits.
Definitely a hot topic.
So this closed data dilemma, as the paper calls it, it affects everyone, really.
Whether you're the artist or the developer or just someone who uses AI, it's all connected.
It's about how these technologies are developed and used. So it begs the question, could open data sets be a solution?
That's a good question.
Imagine a world where all the data used to train these powerful systems is just freely available. Anyone can access it. Anyone can use it.
That's a promise of open data sets, right? Transparency, reproducibility, a level playing field for AI development.
It sounds pretty ideal.
It does.
Right.
But here's the thing, and this might surprise you. There are currently NRO large-scale LLMs that have been trained entirely on open data.
Wait, really? None. Why not?
It's a great idea in theory, but in practice, it's more complicated than it seems.
Okay, so what are the roadblocks? What's stopping us from making this happen?
Well, there are quite a few. It's not as simple as just dumping a bunch of data online.
Right, there's got to be more to it.
For one thing, copyright laws are incredibly complex.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
They vary from country to country. So figuring out what can be included in an open data set without running into legal trouble is a real headache.
Yeah, especially for large-scale projects, that could be a nightmare. It's a legal maze.
Maze indeed. And even if you manage to sort out the legal stuff, there's another problem finding the data and knowing if you can even use it.
Oh, right, permissions and all that.
Exactly. We run into what the paper calls the metadata mystery. A lot of the information we need, like licensing details, it's often missing, incomplete, unreliable. It's like having a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Frustrating.
It is.
But, okay, what about works in the public domain? Aren't those free to use? Shouldn't that make things easier?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But it's not always that straightforward.
How so?
That's where we bump into the public domain paradox. Just because something's in the public domain, meaning the copyright's expired, it doesn't mean there's a readily available digital copy that's suitable for training AI models.
Oh, I see. So it's not enough for it to be public. It also has to be accessible.
Exactly.
Interesting. Do you have an example?
Sure. Think about Google Books. They've scanned millions of public domain books, but getting access to those digital copies for AI training, that's a whole other story.
It's not as simple as it seems. So we've got the legal hurdles, missing information, difficulties accessing public domain materials. What else?
Well, a lot of open source projects rely heavily on volunteers.
Oh, right, which is amazing for community involvement.
It is, but it also creates its own set of challenges.
In what way?
Managing legal risks and making sure the data quality is consistent with a large team of volunteers, it's really tough.
I can see how that would be tricky. It's a delicate balancing act.
It is. The paper calls it the community conundrum.
So we've got the legal maze, the metadata mystery, the public domain paradox, the community conundrum. It sounds like creating open data sets is a recipe for a major headache.
It can be, but don't worry, the paper doesn't just leave us with a bunch of problems.
Okay, good.
They also offer some potential solutions and some key guiding principles.
All right, let's hear it. What are these guiding principles? How can we overcome these obstacles and create a more open and accessible future for AI training data?
Okay, so we've got this laundry list of challenges, but I know this paper also dives into some real-world examples, right? Projects that are actually trying to build these open data sets.
Yeah, they do. The paper highlights two case studies in particular, and it's really interesting to compare how they're tackling the problem.
Okay, lay it on me.
So the first one is Eleuther AI's Common Pile.
Common pile.
Yeah. The goal with this one is to create a huge data set made entirely of public domain and open access materials.
Wow, so they're going all in on this open approach. No legally questionable data whatsoever. Exactly. They're drawing a line in the sand. But of course, it's not just about gathering any old public domain content. They're being strategic about what they include.
Makes sense. What kind of stuff are they prioritizing?
Well, one thing they're focusing on is code.
Code, like computer code.
Yeah. They were actually one of the first to combine code and natural language in a dataset like this with their previous project, the Pile. And research shows that LLMs trained on this kind of data are much better at understanding complex instructions.
Interesting. So it's not just about feeding them books and articles.
Nope. Code is a really valuable source of information for these models.
So coders out there, take note. Your work is helping to shape the future of AI. What else are they including?
Public domain books are a big one, of course.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's not just about grabbing any old book that's out of copyright.
Right, because those could be full of outdated language or biases.
Exactly. So they're putting a lot of effort into identifying books that are both historically relevant and reflect contemporary values.
It's like building a time capsule of knowledge, but making sure it's a time capsule we're actually proud of.
I like that analogy.
But didn't we talk about how even accessing public domain materials can be tricky?
It can be, yeah, especially with older texts.
So how are they dealing with that?
But they're doing a lot of the grunt work themselves. Digitizing, cleaning up the text, making it usable.
It's a big undertaking.
It is. But they're committed to making it happen. They're also gathering academic papers from open access repositories like Arcure.
Oh yeah, Arcure. That's a gold mine of scientific knowledge.
It is. And they're not ignoring government texts either. A lot of government documents are automatically in the public domain, so that's another valuable source.
So we've got books, academic papers, government documents. Are they scouring the web too?
They are. They've developed a tool to crawl through Common Crawl, which is this massive archive of web pages.
Oh wow, that's huge.
It is. And they're filtering out content that has Creative Commons licenses.
So they're leaving no stone unturned in their quest for open data. But I remember you saying that quality is just as important as quantity, right?
Oh, absolutely. They're using some pretty strict filters to make sure they're only including high-quality text in the dataset.
Garbage in, garbage out, as they say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's Eleuther AI's Common Pile. It's still a work in progress, but it's a really ambitious project with a clear vision for training LLMs on truly open data. Now, you mentioned there was another project with a different approach.
Yeah, what was that one called again?
Plius. They have a couple of data sets to the Common Corpus and YouTube Commons, and their approach is very community-focused.
Community focus. That's interesting. It's like a grassroots movement for open data. How are they going about it?
So for their Common Corpus, they're sticking with older public domain contents, specifically texts published before 1884.
Oh, so they're going way back. Why
Right.
that cutoff?
It's a clever way to avoid a lot of those tricky copyright issues we talked about earlier.
Ah, so they're being strategic. Sticking with the classics, but for good reason.
Exactly. And they're not doing it alone. They're partnering with cultural institutions and organizations like the French Ministry of Culture and Hugging Face.
Wow, that's some serious collaboration. It's great to see that kind of cross-sector teamwork.
It is. And what about their YouTube Commons data set? Have you heard about that one?
YouTube Commons. No, tell me more.
Well, this one is all about tapping into the massive amount of video content on YouTube that's available under Creative Commons licenses.
Oh, wow. Using YouTube for AI training. That's a cool idea.
Right. They're using the transcripts of these videos, which include both human-created and automatically generated ones, even translations.
So they're capturing all these different styles of language from all over the world.
Yes. And they're creating a data set that's really rich in conversational data, which could be really valuable for training AI models that can interact with humans in a more natural way.
It's like they're bottling up the essence of human conversation. So they're using YouTube, but also recognizing that not all transcripts are created equal, right?
Yeah, they're aware that the quality of automatically generated transcripts can vary,
Mm.
but they see it as a starting point, something that can be improved over time with the help of the community.
So it's about progress, not perfection. That makes sense. But how is Plius's approach fundamentally different from Eleuther AI? They're both working towards open data sets, right?
They are, but their philosophies are a bit different. Eleuther AI is aiming for a really large static data set. Plius is more interested in fostering a community that can continuously improve and expand these data sets over time.
It's like the Wikipedia model applied to AI training data, a living, breathing repository that evolves with input from the community.
That's a great way to put it. They believe that this community-driven approach is key to unlocking more open data and making sure it benefits everyone.
So it's not just about the tech, it's about building a more equitable and collaborative future for AI. I love that. But how are they actually putting this into practice? How are they supporting this community-driven approach?
Well, they're doing a lot of cool things. For example, they're developing tools to correct errors in scanned documents and sharing those tools with cultural heritage institutions. They're also working hard to build trust and reciprocity within the open data ecosystem.
So it's about making sure everyone who contributes feels valued and benefits from the collective effort.
Exactly.
It's really inspiring to see how dedicated they are to this vision. It's not just building data sets, it's building a movement.
I agree. Both Eleuther AI and Plius are taking different paths, but they share that common goal of making the data used to train LLMs open and accessible to everyone.
Which is a goal worth striving for. Because when knowledge and information are freely available, it opens up so many possibilities for innovation and progress. But this isn't just about the data itself, is it?
No, it's not. It's also about the values we embed in the process, the principles we uphold, the kind of future we want to create with AI.
It's about making sure this powerful technology benefits everyone, not just a select few. So we're taking a deep dive into open data, but it's also a deep dive into our own ethics and aspirations for a more equitable and transparent world. But before we get too philosophical, let's bring it back to the paper. What are some of the concrete recommendations they offer for moving forward? What can we actually do to make this vision a reality? So we talked about the challenges and seen some inspiring projects. What's the next step? What does this paper recommend for building a future where open data is the fuel for AI?
Well, the paper lays out some really concrete recommendations. It's not just pointing out problems. It's like a roadmap for both the tech world and for policymakers.
Okay, let's hear it. What's step one?
Well, for starters, we need to make open data more available. We talked about how even if something IS legally in the public domain, getting your hands on it can be a huge pain.
Right, it's that treasure chest with the missing key. So how do we fix that?
Well, the paper talks about some policy changes that could make a big difference. Imagine if there was like a global system for clearly identifying public domain works no more, sifting through different countries' laws.
That would be amazing.
Right. And they also suggest that institutions like the EU or even public libraries could actually certify public domain materials, so developers would have a reliable source to turn to.
So it's like a stamp of approval. This is definitely public domain. Use it freely.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. And what about from the tech side? What can developers do?
Well, one big area is improving tools for extracting content. Think about all those old documents and books that have been scanned but are stuck in PDFs.
Right, they're digital, but not exactly usable.
Right. We need better ways to extract the openly licensed stuff from those messy formats.
Makes sense. Anything else on the tech wish list?
We also need better ways to control how our data is used. Right now, it's often all or nothing. You either let the AI crawlers have everything or you block them completely. The paper suggests developing more fine-grained consent mechanisms.
Oh, so like you could say, okay, you can use my blog posts, but not my emails.
Exactly. Giving people more control over their data.
I like that. Okay, so we need to make it easier to find and use open data. What else?
The second big area is legal clarity. There's so much uncertainty around what's permissible when it comes to using data, especially for smaller organizations that don't have a legal team.
Yeah, it's like trying to navigate a minefield.
It is. And that fear of legal trouble, it can really stifle innovation.
So how do we make the legal landscape less scary?
One idea is a safe harbor provision.
The safe harbor.
Yeah. It would basically give organizations some leeway to correct licensing errors without getting sued right away.
Oh, so it's like a grace period.
Yeah. It would encourage more people to experiment with open data without being terrified of making a mistake.
That's a good idea. What about on the tech side? Can they help with this?
Remember that metadata mystery we talked about? Well, having clear machine-readable metadata standards could make a huge difference. If licensing information is labeled consistently, it becomes much easier for developers to know what they can and can't use.
It's like a nutrition label for data. You know exactly what's in it.
Perfect analogy.
All right, so making open data easier to find, understand both legally and technically. What's next?
The third recommendation is all about responsible AI governance. The paper makes it clear that simply making data open isn't enough.
Right. We have to think about how it's used, too.
Exactly. Developers need to think about the potential downsides, the potential biases that might be lurking in the data.
Because even open data can be flawed.
Absolutely. So they need to work closely with communities that might be impacted by their work.
Yeah.
They need to make it easy for people to opt out of data sets if they want to, and they need to be constantly on the lookout for biases in the data.
So it's not just about opening up the data, it's about using it responsibly.
Yes.
Okay. And what's the final recommendation? What's the last piece of this roadmap?
The last one, and it's a big one, is sustainable funding.
Ah, yes. Money makes the world go round.
Right. Creating and maintaining open data sets takes a lot of time and effort and resources, and someone has to pay for it.
So who foots the bill?
Well, the paper looks at various funding models. There's the traditional stuff like government grants and philanthropic support, but they also talk about more innovative approaches like the models used by Wikimedia or spawning.
Oh, right. So like offering paid services alongside the free stuff?
Yeah, finding ways to generate revenue that supports the open source work. It's about being creative and finding sustainable solutions.
So those are the key recommendations. Make open data easier to access and clarify the legal landscape, promote responsible AI governance, and find sustainable ways to fund it all. A pretty ambitious agenda.
It is, but it's an important one. And remember, these are just the highlights. There's a lot more detail in the paper itself.
Well, we'll definitely link to that in the show notes so listeners can dive in and learn more. But before we wrap up, I want to bring it back to our listener. Why should they care about all of this? How does this open data stuff impact their lives?
This isn't just some technical debate happening in a vacuum. The choices we make today about open data will shape the future of AI. They will determine what kinds of AI tools are developed, who gets to build them, and how those tools are used in our daily lives.
It's about control. It's about equity. It's about the future of technology itself. Pretty big stuff.
It is. And it's not about being a passive observer. We can all contribute to this conversation.
So what are you waiting for, dear listener? Dive into this paper, learn about the amazing projects we discussed, and start thinking about how you can be part of this movement towards a more open and accessible AI future. Who knew that something as seemingly dry as data licensing could be so exciting, right?
Right.
It just goes to show that even in the complex world of AI, there's always something new to discover. So keep asking questions, stay curious, and join us next time for another deep dive into the world of knowledge.